You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the BioHealth Capital Region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in BioHealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis, your host for BioTalk, and we basically have a very interesting guest today who is a new transplant to the BioHealth Capital Region within the last year, and talking about a new institute also for the BioHealth Capital Region, which is very exciting, which will not only have regional but national and international implications. We have Dr. Bradley Maron, who is the co-director and director of scientific operations, University of Maryland Institute for Health Computing, which is the new institute, IHC. Also is the senior associate dean for precision medicine at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Dr. Moran, welcome to BioTalk.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
After I got all of those titles out, you have many responsibilities at the university, don't you?
I do. It's a good part of the job.
It's a good part of the job, but we're lucky to have you. And rather than me introduce you through your bio, I think the best thing for our listeners is for you to introduce yourself with whatever appropriate background you think they'd like to be interested in knowing about how you got to where you are today, Dr. Moran.
Sure. No, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad to provide a little bit of background on what the path was that led me to the new Institute for Health Computing. I'm a native Marylander, having grown up in the Bethesda area, graduated from Walter Johnson High School, in fact, and then went off to different areas of the country, ultimately went to medical school, graduating from the Brown University School of Medicine, and had been in Boston for the past 20 years, where I completed my training as a cardiologist and also running a laboratory focusing on the basic mechanisms of disease. But in that process, grew an interest in understanding how big data or large amounts of information that can be collected both from the standpoint of biology, but also from the standpoint of clinical medicine, can be important for advancing human health and disease. So I was at Harvard Medical School for approximately 20 years and at the Broad Institute, MIT, for several years as well, and was recruited to come back to Maryland and serve in the current role by the new dean at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Mark Gladwin, who I had interacted with over many years through our shared interest in the approach to research as well as to the approach to patients with different forms of heart and lung disease. So it's my pleasure to be here talking to you today from Bethesda. And so in that way, it's sort of a full circle for me, and I'm really excited to be back.
Well, Dr. Moran, we're excited to have somebody that has come the other direction, because we always hear about people going from Maryland up to Boston. So here we have as a native Marylander returning back to Maryland. And since you spent 20 years at Harvard and the Broad Institute at MIT, got a good feeling about that ecosystem. Before we get into the Institute for Health Computing and what you're doing here at the University of Maryland, let's talk a little bit about different ecosystems around the United States and around the world. And you've had a chance to be in one of the leading life science ecosystems in the world in Boston. And now you've come to what is something that is fairly established, but still growing in Maryland. Can you talk a little bit about the contrast and differences and observations you have about what you had in the Boston ecosystem and what you're encountering here in the Maryland ecosystem now?
Yeah, no, I'm glad to address that. I think it's an interesting question. I think that in some ways, the similarities also start the conversation around the differences between the two areas. Both are defined by opportunities for interaction between academic institutions and public-private partnership entities in the life science and biotech space. So in the case of Boston, it's no surprise that there are a lot of different universities there, not only Harvard, but all of the affiliated Harvard training hospitals. And with that comes additional scientific interest and opportunity to interact with different kinds of patients that stimulate questions for physician scientists, and as a result, for other forms of science that hinge on very fundamental concepts that are exciting and very contemporary. Similar to Boston, one of the great driving factors for the Institute for Health Computing is establishing an academic presence in Montgomery County that can function as the engine for intellectual ideas that ultimately build new biotech and life science partnerships. So, from that standpoint, a lot of what is similar between Boston and Montgomery County is the principal focus on academics as serving the main engine for development in the commercial space. Boston, of course, had some interest in this many years ago in the Kendall Square area. And I think that there are certain features to the academic environment that made that ripe in terms of timing. But I also think the branding there, as has been the case in Silicon Valley and other areas of the country, the Innovation Triangle in North Carolina, sort of advances progress. And that's something that I know the Montgomery County area is also interested in, as well as Maryland, to message the incredible and unique strengths that truly delineate this area compared to those other areas, and which I saw as the main reason to come to this great and rich environment to help lead what I know will be the next phase for development in what has already been a successful area.
You talk about some of the differences as well as the similarities. Montgomery County has been looking for ways to engage academia for many years and have some type of an anchor program. So I think that what is envisioned here with the Institute for Health Computing is to design a program which has the potential not to be just like something else in Boston or San Francisco, but differentiated and also have some leadership potential to be the leader in a specialized field, taking advantage of these academic resources that we have in this region. So, this is a good time to probably introduce the listeners to the Institute for Health Computing, why it was created, what are the strategic partnerships that help it evolve, and really what was the primary driving factor that attracted you to come and lead and be an executive co-director of this Institute for Health Computing, Dr. Moran?
Well, I thank you for that very important and interesting question to answer. The Institute for Health Computing was really the brainchild of the Montgomery County executive, Mark Elrich, who worked closely with the dean for the College of Computer, Mathematical, and Natural Sciences at College Park, Dr. Amitabh Varshney, and has also worked closely with the dean for the University of Maryland School of Medicine, Dr. Mark Gladwin, whom I work with quite closely. But the Institute for Health Computing has evolved into a large, robust, and very inspiring collaboration. First, I'd like to acknowledge the support and contributions of my co-directors, Dr. Sujal Vista from the University of Maryland College Park, and Dr. Warren D'Souza, who is the Chief Innovation Officer at the University of Maryland Medical System. And our collaborations extend to include at College Park, Provost Jennifer King Rice, and of course, President Daryl Pines. And at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, Provost Roger Ward and President Bruce Jarrell. It's critical to acknowledge the partnership of the University of Maryland Medical System, in addition to Dr. D'Souza, the contribution and vision from President and CEO Mohan Suntha. And ultimately, it's this tripartite group that serves as the true framework for our unique partnership. And this is, in and of itself, one of the distinguishing features of the Institute for Health Computing compared to other health computing ideas or organizations that are popping up in academic centers across the country. Specifically, it's our juxtaposition of a world-class computer science university in the form of the University of Maryland College Park with world-class clinical content expertise and medical infrastructure and a medical school in the form of the University of Maryland School of Medicine at Baltimore, as well as other allied professional schools of health and human disease that are in Baltimore, including nursing, social work, the graduate school in biology, pharmacy, the law school, school of dentistry. All of these together form a robust medical basis for the Institute for Health Computing and the University of Maryland Medical System, which is an extremely robust network of clinical operations that are strategically placed across the entire state of Maryland, which gives us incredible power and opportunity to understand how data science can innovate solutions to complicated problems across the healthcare space when it comes to patients. And as a result of this unique tripartite mission, we have assembled a six-center model for the Institute for Health Computing. This is the scientific backbone of our operations. A center on artificial intelligence, a center on bioinformatics, which is understanding how to organize biological or clinical data using computational methods so that we can find hidden patterns in those elements. A center on immersive reality, which takes a very futuristic and exciting approach to visualizing in graphical form complicated concepts that can then be understood by patients or by providers or by companies that can't always do using very conventional methods of visualization. A center on therapeutic target discovery to understand how we can use computer science for building new drugs. A center on population and community health that allows us to understand how the implications of our findings can be important across groups of patients, especially when it relates to our fundamental objective for advancing health equity initiatives at the community level. And then finally, a center on real-world data and adaptive clinical trials, which aims to understand how we can decentralize research outside of hospitals in a way that allows greater engagement from community members to participate so that the research can actually benefit them, which is what we all should be doing from the outset. So these six centers are integrated in a way that allows a collaborative science and flow of ideas to build what is an extremely powerful and broad pipeline of potential. And that is the following: taking an idea that is outside the box from concept and theory, not only to practice, but to actual implementation at the patient level. And we can accomplish that through the wide purview of our capacity as it relates to computer science, clinical expertise, and then actually the medical system. There are a number of important features to this model that are worth mentioning. First, the medical system itself allows us to innovate what's called a learning health system, which takes our findings and deploys that information into the medical system itself so that it can respond to changes in our understanding of how patients present with disease, how they should be treated, and can implement recommendations at point of care that are then contemplated by a provider or another allied healthcare specialist and catered to individual patients based on their broader profile. This is what we all want. We all want to be able to understand that the treatment plan or the likelihood of a disease being diagnosed early is individualized to our own profile. And that is one of the overarching goals of the Learning Health System and the Institute for Health Computing. A second major distinguishing feature is the population of Maryland itself, which really reflects a broad definition of diversity across many important parameters, not solely categorical designations when it comes to race or sex, although that's, of course, very important. We want to take a more contemporary view of that through the Institute of Health Computing and understand social and environmental drivers of disease, which we can do based on the truly heterogeneous range of patients that we capture through the medical system as part of the Institute for Health Computing. And that includes patients that reside in urban areas of, say, Baltimore City that are challenged by access to healthcare, as well as rural regions in the Tidewater and Eastern Shore area that are also challenged by access to healthcare, but perhaps for different reasons. Socioeconomic and demographic and environmental drivers of disease, which until now have gone largely underappreciated in the process of understanding research in its most powerful potential form.
That's quite an introduction to the Institute. And the thing I like, you said many times, was patient centered, because a lot of people think about these things based on technology, but they forget about what the technology is supposed to do. And so I think the ultimate goal of having this being patient centered is really the guiding principle for the operation for the Institute for Health Computing, which you were very eloquent about stating. And let's talk one last thing about this new center and what attracted you, because a year ago or 2 years ago, when they started talking to you about coming back to Maryland, I don't know, it was probably a dream, clean sheet of paper, didn't have a lot of words on it, and there was a vision for creating something like this. So, what was it that really made the deciding factor for you to want to come back to get involved with something so new, so embryonic, and visionary in the future? And I would imagine you had to believe that it was more than a dream for some people, and there was actually going to be some funding there to actually implement this vision as well, Dr. Moran. So, talk a little bit about the attraction and why you felt that it was worth coming back for this.
Yeah, the fundamental answer to that question is really the totality of opportunity that came with the concept of the Institute for Health Computing. It was the idea that three principal stakeholders would be working together in the same location as a critical and unique distinguishing feature compared to other programs that use computer science to help advance health and human disease. We're in an era now, as everyone sort of appreciates more and more, with popular press communicating the potential for different technologies, whether it be AI, of course, or other similar methods that are being invented or haven't been invented yet. And so we have to acknowledge that medicine is really a repository of big data. We are faced with an increasing amount of information as providers that requires better approaches to understanding the most salient features of that information. And so the ability to bring that into the same space as a medical system, as an equal partner, is very critical. Second, and I need to emphasize very clearly how grateful the Institute for Health Computing is to the level of support, not just financially, although the economic investment by Montgomery County into the Institute has been incredible, but also their overall support for our mission, their interactive position about how we can work together to expand the biotech and life science space here has been extremely supportive. It's no small advantage as an academic to have an opportunity to work hand in hand with a body like the Montgomery County government. So we're very proud to be partners with them. Secondly, the University of Maryland, through its Empower Foundation, which is a funding mechanism that unites the University of Maryland College Park and University of Maryland Baltimore campuses together, has also invested an incredible commitment to the Institute for Health Computing, not only, again, from a financial standpoint, although their resources have been critical and substantial, but also with the support in their guidance at the highest levels, as I mentioned earlier, from the presidents down, has really made us feel that this is a stable and extremely well-supported entity that will live in perpetuity. And that's our goal, is to evolve in a way that achieves our highest objectives and goals. In addition to the critical funding support from Montgomery County and the Empower Foundation, I also want to acknowledge a recent bill passed by the state legislature, Senate Bill 376, which earmarks critical funding on an annual basis to the Institute for Health Computing, further stabilizing our mission. Third, our partnership with the medical system, as I mentioned before, really distinguishes our capacity, and beyond that, has introduced me to a number of precious relationships when it comes to professional development and how we can really learn from each other as we evolve moving forward. So I saw that opportunity early in my consideration of the role, in part because I didn't think that anything like this could be replicated in other states. Maryland has some unique features that really make this feasible and something that is going to happen at very high level of success. So that was my calculus for coming down here to help run this.
Well, thank you for making that decision. We're going to try to help support you in any way we can to make this successful so that you can stay here until you retire, Dr. Murray. Let's talk a little bit about healthcare computing and computing in general. Right now, there's a lot of new terminology. There's new technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing. And a lot of the listeners don't know that one of the leading academic institutions in the world is the University of Maryland in College Park when it comes to healthcare computing or to computing in general. But it's also a mystery to our listeners right now. What is AI about? What is machine learning? How is it applied to healthcare and me as a patient being better taken care of and having access to better healthcare, drugs, devices, and everything else? So, talk a little bit about the role and challenges of data science with all of this new emerging technology and how it improves health and wellness.
It's a very important question because in the end, in the final analysis, it will be how well we serve the patients that we aim to treat, both on an individual patient level, but also on a population level, and how generalizable our findings are to populations outside of Maryland. That, of course, is the ultimate goal. Now, we aim to accomplish that by building public-private partnerships. We have unique positioning here in the Montgomery County and Bethesda region when it comes to federal stakeholders, including the National Institutes of Health, the Food and Drug Administration, NIST, and other great entities and subdivisions such as the National Cancer Institute. And so those partnerships, which we're forging now and have formalized in many regards, really provide a capacity for our interactions and our academic ceiling that is amplified. And so we see great positioning there. Now, when we think a little bit about what we're really discussing, what is AI? How does that really put into motion a better version of healthcare? Well, we can look at that from a number of different examples or angles, but in its most fundamental form, artificial intelligence speaks to the idea that there are algorithms, mathematical codes that are better primed to pick up patterns in information than people like you and me. And so that's not always the case. Every one of the new methods needs to be tested against the standard method because we can't make assumptions that just because it's the new shiny object that it necessarily will outperform the tried and true approach. But let's take for a moment an ultrasound of the heart, which is a test that as a cardiologist, I am quite familiar with. I know how to perform them and I know how to read them. But there are 127 movies that make up a complete ultrasound study of the heart. That's a lot of information to digest across many, many, many structures in the heart. This is a beating structure that is dynamic in its function, and there are a lot of different sort of moving parts that make the heart work. And what we're learning is that when we think about how AI can be deployed to interpret patterns, there are new insights that are gained that would not otherwise been available simply by reading those studies using the typical method of an expert in the ultrasound reading skill to accomplish on their own. So I don't see AI necessarily replacing any one doctor or nurse, but what we're using right now are tools to augment our understanding of the patterns that are there but that we just simply can't process based on our own brain hardwire. And so there are many, many examples of that. At point of care, when you see a doctor, wouldn't it be interesting to know that the AI algorithm is understanding individual characteristics of your body weight or your medical history or tests that you've had and making new connections that raise suspicion of an early stage of a disease that would not otherwise be recognized just by the typical approach to diagnosis. And so we have an obligation to patients to take advantage of those opportunities through the concepts of data science.
Dr. Maron, I've had a chance to hear you present at the Life Science Advisory Board about the Institute for Health Computing. One of the things that you explained at that meeting was about how IHC can bring learning in healthcare to the people, basically through almost going through a 5-step approach. And the 5 steps you mentioned were analyze, innovate, prevent, treat, and adapt. Can you elaborate a little bit more on those 5 steps and how that's applied through IHC?
Yes, the goal is to capture information that define patients. And we want to use data science to optimize the discovery of patterns that can overall characterize an individual person to the best of our ability. So we know that medical testing, exercise testing, imaging, biologic information in the blood, environmental cues, all of that is accessible in the medical record and electronic. And so we have now, based on that, an opportunity to use different analytical methods, whether it's AI or different types of analysis methods, to get a better snapshot of who an individual person is so that we're not overemphasizing one single measurement or one characteristic unfairly, as well as in a way that overlooks patterns that might be important for identifying the best type of treatment for that patient or the possibility of a diagnosis that they would not otherwise get until it's too late. So we have a 5-step process that contemplates each different step in that overall trajectory of how we want to leverage data science, the electronic information that we're capturing in the course of daily care in a way that's safe, private, but nonetheless feeds back to patients information that they can then help digest with their provider so that we can improve outcomes and give patients the best opportunity for healthy longevity.
Well, there's a lot of thought that's gone into this, and I can see that you're not going into this willy-nilly, basically. You want to make certain that the Institute for Healthcare Computing is going to be the gold standard for the way that you approach patient care in the future, I would assume, utilizing health data. Let's talk a little bit about some of the economics around the Institute for Health Computing. I would imagine that the university system, as well as Montgomery County, just doesn't want to create another research center. They'd like to see potential economic benefits or economic development come out as a result of the activities and the services that the Institute might provide. Talk a little bit about how you believe this can become an economic engine for the university, for Maryland, for Montgomery County, and potentially even wider than that in the nation in the future.
Absolutely. This is an important and distinguishing feature as well of the Institute for Health Computing, which is not solely an academic enterprise, although the academics are critical to our success, of course, and we have a number of academic goals. But as someone that has been a scientist in the public-private partnership space in the past and recognize the critical value of amplifying progress in a way that can only be done through industry and commercial partnerships that are responsible, but nonetheless invested in success. This is a really critical ingredient to overall impact. We need to leverage the strengths that we already have in the form of expert data scientists, as I mentioned, from College Park and the medical system, as well as the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and understand how to position those skill sets for building new economic paths of development recognizing ahead of time what ultimately will be the most impactful next step to take an idea when it comes to expanding the landscape of life sciences here in the Montgomery County region and beyond. And so, with that as a principal objective of the Institute for Health Computing, we're extremely well positioned to provide critical resources to companies that already exist but are looking for a potential partnership, or to innovate new companies that come out of findings from the Institute itself. So, based on the capacity model that I mentioned before, we are able to address almost any question or problem that's posed to us across the health and life sciences space. That's part of the strength of our capacity.
Basically, I know that you can't be all things to all people. So, how are you going to prioritize where the Institute's going to focus initially and as it grows? But where do you determine where your real strengths, proprietary advantages are, some of the differential things that you can do that others can't do, that you're going to begin with the Institute for some of its primary services?
Well, under the guidance of Dean Mark Gladwin and Dean Amitabh Varshney, we are assembling a robust strategic focus. We already have acted on a number of our core principles when it comes to interacting with potential company partners in the region. We are also interfacing very closely with the Montgomery County economic development groups to understand what's in the landscape already, how we can accommodate their needs so that we are able to be nimble in our capacity, be nimble in our skill set, and adjust to changing demand when it comes to analytics and data science capacity, as well as clinical implementation opportunities. Martha Jerzak and Barbara Braun partner with other allied members of the Institute for Health Computing, including Justin Brooks and Jordan Broutman and others, forming a strong alliance around our interactions with different company partnerships. And we already have had examples of strong success in that regard. So I think we're off to a very good start. This is a priority in our mental organization and the ethos of the Institute. So we're more than glad to interact with other interested potential stakeholders.
And rather than being a virtual institute, you're going to have a physical facility where people can come together. So, talk a little bit about your new facility that's located in Montgomery County.
Well, the Montgomery County location is on Executive Boulevard, about a half mile from the Pike and Rose shopping plaza, about a half mile from the North Bethesda Red Line metro stop. Really well positioned in a beautiful, recently renovated commercial real estate area. The venue's just absolutely lovely, very well lit. It's exciting to be here. Everybody that comes is really excited to sit here and to enter into conversations. We have weekly or bi-weekly meetings for our academic progress. We're hosting different events that bring private partnerships together with the academic focus. We've hosted different groups, including the state government in terms of different officials from time to time, and county officials as well. So everyone that's come by has been really complimentary to our setup, and I think that really is an important feature to maximizing our creativity and flow of ideas. Montgomery County has a plan to assemble or build a structure as well in the future that would serve as a more permanent place for the Institute for Health Computing and could potentially accommodate different interests when it comes to the health and human disease space and science in that regard. So we're really excited to be here for a number of reasons, not the least of which I've mentioned already, but deserves second discussion, which is our proximity to some of the most powerful stakeholders in health policy and health research in the world, in the form of the NIH and the National Cancer Institute and all of those other federal bodies that we are building partnerships with directly. That's a very critical advantage, one that I'll mention is not present in Boston or San Francisco or North Carolina. So we intend to be a partner and a contributor in this ecosystem We intend to be available to those other potential collaborators in a way that is synergistic and can really raise the tidewater of the region, which is no small feat given the international reputation of the NIH itself, but we're committed to being successful in that regard.
And we're talking to Dr. Bradley Moran, who is the executive co-director of scientific operations at the Institute for Health Computing as one of his titles. He has multiple titles. Let's talk about the future a little bit, Dr. Moran, as we come close to a close on this podcast. We talked a little bit about some of the services and programs and research you're going to be involved in near term. What's it going to look like 5 years when we look back and say, what's success look like in 5 years? What are some of those 5 year goals that you'd like to achieve that this institute's going to be measured on by all of the key stakeholders?
I think that's a great question. So, our metrics fall across a range of goals. We, of course, have as part of our mandate an obligation to advance science through academic pursuits. So, a strong and robust track record and footprint in the medical and computer science literature, as well as high visibility in different capacities in this regard, is always going to be central to our mission. However, we have an equal obligation to advance the footprint of the health and life sciences business ecosystem here. So that includes leveraging space at the Institute for incubator use to nurture small companies that may benefit from approved collaboration and to foster wider engagement between the Institute for Health Computing and commercial and business entities. It includes recruiting new businesses to the region, either from within the locality here or even perhaps from other areas. We have modeled different return on investment patterns that we are projecting that focus on the impact of bringing a student to the area, the impact of bringing a research grant to the area, the impact of bringing a new company to the area, the impact of building out patents and how that can be licensed and what the downstream impact of that is, and how the Institute for Health Computing can be its most maximal positive contributor to those goals. Obviously, we would like to expand just from a fundamental standpoint in our workforce. We aim to function as an exemplar destination for building a balanced and diverse pipeline of students and trainees, both in the computer science, but also in the medical spaces, as well as engineering and some of the disciplines in science that are well positioned to innovate new discoveries that in turn foster better economic development in the region, with a commitment to the community. So the concept that we will set the example for how a modern data science and Institute for Health Computing functions contemplates its role with the members of Montgomery County. And thereby, we'd like to involve students at the middle school and high school and other levels so that we can begin enrichment programs. So we have sort of a broad range of metrics, all of which aim to address one of the first comments you made, which is egress of students and talent from the area to other regions. We, of course, want to contribute to a switch where people view, of course, Montgomery County and Bethesda as the primary destination, in part through the work that's being done at the Institute for Health Computing.
Well, I know that this is music to the ears of County Executive Mark Elrick because he's been talking about trying to get an academic center in Montgomery County for many years. So, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you'd like the listeners to know, Dr. Moran, about IHC, yourself, anything else in general, or impressions that you have as you've become acquainted with this new enterprise for Maryland and University System of Maryland?
I think that it's important to communicate that we are a welcoming group. We're engaged. We have an interest in building deeply rooted connections, not just to the Montgomery County region, but to other areas across Maryland, including where some of our clinical operations are in Baltimore City. That our mission is in itself most fundamentally determined by health equity goals and how we can use data science to advance data science and use data science to advance progress in the health equity space. So we're very excited. We have a lot of enthusiasm, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk a little bit about that with you today.
Well, I think you've done an excellent job in basic English and basic language of basically talking about a complicated subject, especially when we get into healthcare computing, AI, and all of the other things that people are hearing about, but can't understand how it relates to them personally and potentially their improvement of their health in the future. So, Dr. Bradley Maron, Executive Co-Director and Director of Scientific Operations, University of Maryland Institute for Health Computing, and Senior Associate Dean for Precision Medicine at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. Thank you for being on BioTalk today, and we hope to have many follow-up conversations with you as you progress with this new vision.
Thank you very much for hosting me. I appreciate that very much.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.